Part 53. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 528. This is a half-collapsed room. There is a wooden bed inside, and a young woman is lying on the bed. The woman is covered with a quilt. There were a lot of pustules on the woman's body. There were pustules everywhere on her face and skin. Her breath was in a very unstable state. Sometimes it was so low that it could not be noticed, and sometimes it suddenly rose up. But every time the breath rose up, the woman lying on the bed, the woman will appear very, very painful, and the pus on her body will flow out involuntarily, and many pustules on her body will bulge. The whole room was filled with a disgusting stench. At this moment, another woman came in with a towel and a wash basin in her hand. In fact, the water here and everything here must have been contaminated by radiation, but to the woman lying on the bed, it no longer mattered. This woman's experience is somewhat similar to Sudbai's, but she only entered the story world 5 years in advance, while Sudbai's was 30 years. Moreover, Sudbai had experienced the explosion of a nuclear power plant. Sudbai had also experienced the terrible feeling of sweeping radiation in an instant. However, Sudbai seems to have persisted in taking one breath to survive the long-term nuclear radiation, so he has become a kind of old fried dough stick existence. Although his body is covered with sores, they have already settled. Come down. And this woman's body is in the most severe period of physical rejection. Now she is just gritting her teeth and persisting, relying on the special blood of the audience to stay alive. Sister, are you feeling better? Another woman asked with concern as she carefully wiped the body of the woman on the bed with a towel. I'm in trouble. The woman on the hospital bed struggled and sighed. In this story world, I may become a burden to you. Sister, this is what we should shoulder together. The younger sister picked up the dirty basin full of pus. I'll go find some more food. Sister, you take a rest first. I won't be too far away. The two sisters communicated in Korean. My sister nodded. The younger sister smiled slightly and walked out of the room. When she just walked out of the room, the smile on her face suddenly disappeared, and a look of impatience appeared on her face. The sister lying in the room had a look of resentment on her face. About a quarter of an hour later, the younger sister came back after finding some food. The older sister stared at the ceiling with her eyes open and tried to raise her left hand. Layers of silk threads flew out of her hand and then reintegrated into her body. My sister looked at the scene with some surprise. Sister, can you use your abilities? If you forcibly reshape my body with metal wires, I can regain my strength for half a day, but only for half a day, my sister said helplessly. In fact, she also knew in her heart that she must prevent herself from becoming a damned, otherwise no matter what kind of sisterly love there is, it will not be able to withstand the intrigues among the audience in the story world. Then sister, you should take a good rest first. Don't rush, my sister said with some surprise. Actually, my sister and I should have shared these punishments together. My sister was furious, but her skin was covered with pustules, so it was impossible to tell what she looked like from her appearance. Sister, do you regret it now? If you had not killed the eldest son, you would not have been punished by the broadcast. Although the eldest son no longer belongs to the upper echelons of power, because he is involved in the relationship between that big country and North Korea, it was a political game, so killing him, especially killing him intentionally, would obviously be considered by the broadcasters as unruly behavior by the audience. In the real world, the audience doesn't think it's a big deal to kill an insignificant person. If you don't kill too many people, the broadcaster will turn a blind eye. However, it's different when it comes to those influential people. The eldest son had already lost the political struggle and was in exile abroad. However, as the former first successor, even if he had lost power, he was still tolerated by those in power. The people in power naturally hoped that the eldest son would die soon. Cut off the roots and eliminate future troubles, Otherwise no one can bear the thought of someone else sleeping peacefully beside the bed. It's just that the eldest son has been controlled by another big country in order to protect himself. The North Korean Secret Department organized several assassinations, but they were unsuccessful. But a while ago, news came that the eldest son had been assassinated. For a time, the eldest son was assassinated. His death attracted a lot of international attention. No one thought that he was actually assassinated. His death alone may affect the political structure and direction of the entire Southeast Asia. The elder sister was actually very resentful because she originally agreed that they would do it together, but in the end, she let her go. She had no choice but to act alone, bypassing the eldest son's security team, and directly strangled him to death. Young master. Then, the punishment of broadcasting comes. In this story world, the probability of surviving in my current state, even if my sister desperately protects me, will only be very low. What's more, this sister is a ruthless and unkind person. Regret, my sister shook her head, I have never regretted it. Even though because of our special status as listeners, we don't have to get involved in this kind of thing, I don't want to see the eldest son being held in the hands of that big country. A bargaining chip to threaten our country. Perhaps, I am too impulsive. Even after being a listener for so long, I am still too impulsive. This is said from the bottom of my heart, because as a listener, no matter you are in a democracy or a dictatorship, it is difficult for secular forces to control you, let alone order you, especially at the level of senior listeners. You can basically ignore secular boundaries. But everyone has their own perseverance. The two sisters have been trained as agents by the North Korean Secret Service since they were young. Although after becoming an audience, some of their thoughts must have been changed, and their view of the problem is no longer so extreme and one-sided. But some deep-rooted thoughts are still there. My sister was just about to say something else when suddenly, there was a sound of bells ringing around her. My sister frowned suddenly. The sound of the bell was very familiar. Is it him? Obviously, my sister also heard who was coming. It should be him. I didn't expect that dwarf to have entered the story world. My sister suddenly thought of a possibility. Sister, since he is here, don't you have something to do? Do you want to make me a puppet? It won't make her a puppet, but I think she has a way, my sister quickly explained. Dong dong dong. There was a knock on the door. Come in. The ringing of the bell before was a kind of transmission of identity information, so at this time, Pan Wenji walked in openly. He saw his sister lying on the bed at the first sight, and his eyes immediately lit up with joy. Another good material. Jin Yingay also walked in. The people of these two countries on the two peninsulas are originally from the same ethnic group. The atmosphere of political and military confrontation is very serious. However, in the audience circle, the relationship is relatively harmonious because there is a common opponent in the broadcast arrangement, Japan. I really didn't expect to see you two brothers and sisters here, Lee Minor. What's wrong with you? Pan Wenji asked with concern. My sister snorted and said nothing. The younger sister winked at Pan Wenji. Apparently, the younger sister had already taken over with Pan Wenji the moment she went out. I have a way to make you better, Pan Wenji said with a smile. I will not allow you to make me into a puppet, Lee Minor refused directly. As a puppet, she was not willing to do such a stupid thing as making wedding clothes for others. Hey, don't. I don't have to control your soul and consciousness, but I can control your life and death. How about it? Pan Wenji took out the third and last insect egg in his hand. You should I know this thing. Lee Minor's face showed a look of hesitation, and then she finally nodded. She actually had no other choice. Pan Wenji couldn't help but hurried over and put the eggs into Lee Minor's mouth. Lee Minor opened her mouth and wrapped the eggs. Then, Pan Wenji took out a syringe, which he had injected into Subai before. Thing. Don't think I don't know what that is, Li Min'er said fiercely. Don't panic, I won't give you this injection. I will do what I say. Pan Wenji could only take the needle back angrily. You will be weak for a while, but after that it will be fine. It is not safe here. We must move immediately to the direction of the nuclear power plant. Pan Wenji stood up and waved. This is a puppet I made out of a Chinese audience. Subai walked in from the outside and very coldly carried Li Min'er on the hospital bed on his shoulders. Let's go. I sense the breath of several other people approaching here. Pan Wenji, his sister Li Ruier and Jin Yingge walked out of the house together, and Subai carried Li Min'er out the door. When crossing the threshold, Li Min'er suddenly turned her face to Subai's ear, and whispered in a voice that only two people could hear. Are you a puppet too? Li Min'er said in Chinese. Subai didn't answer, and carried Li Min'er forward expressionlessly. Perhaps it's because I also have bugs in my body. I can feel that there are more bugs in your body than mine, but I can feel more clearly that those bugs are actually already dead. This is a change that even Pan Wenji cannot detect, because he is just a person who controls bugs, but he is not a bug. He can only control you through the induction of breath. But the bug inside me tells me. They treat the same kindred people in your body. It feels like a rabbit is dead and a fox is sad. This moment. Subai suddenly stopped. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 529. Subai stopped, and a sharp look flashed in the corner of Li Min'er's eyes on her shoulder. However, immediately, another look of surprise appeared on her face. Because Subai only paused briefly at the threshold, then crossed the threshold naturally, carried her on his shoulders, and continued to walk out, following the pace of Pan Wenji and the others. The previous pause seemed to be just an interlude when the puppet crossed the threshold. It was not because of the shock of the puppet being discovered that something was wrong in his heart. It was very ordinary. It seemed that it was just Li Min'er who was overly worried. However, Li Min'er believed in her own judgment. She believed in the clan induction of the squirming bugs in her body that were giving her life. Li Min'er felt that this puppet was still pretending and acting. Stop pretending in front of me. According to what you Chinese say, we are actually grasshoppers on a rope. We can actually join forces. I don't know what you are planning, but I feel that by joining forces with you, the benefits we will gain will definitely be much greater. Li Min'er's voice was very low, just enough for herself and Subai to hear. People who were a little further away thought that Li Min'er was just moaning in pain because the insect eggs had entered the body and decomposed. However, no matter how hard Li Min'er talked, Subai remained unmoved. He was like a cold robot who only knew how to execute orders from Pan Wenji. Finally, Li Min'er's face darkened at this moment, and she shouted directly in her hoarse voice, Pan Wenji, there is something wrong with your puppet. The bugs in his body are already dead and you don't know it. For a moment, Pan Wenji and others who were walking in front all stopped, and the three of them turned back to look here. To be precise, they looked at Subai, who was carrying Li Min'er. Pan Wenji took out his bell, and the metal bone spurs in Jin Yingge's arms were released again. Her sister Li Ruier also waved one hand, and a purple silk thread was immediately wrapped around her hand. Both ends of the thread were lifted up, like a poisonous snake. It has its own spirituality, as if it really wants to choose people to eat. Li Min'er looked at Subai coldly, but Subai still carried her, motionless, as if everything had nothing to do with him. He was still that puppet, and that puppet would only fight simply and directly without regard for itself, without self-awareness. A puppet who could only obey Pan Wenji's orders. Even now, Li Min'er has not noticed any unusual aura fluctuations coming from her subordinate Subai. This means two possibilities: either, he is really just a simple puppet, or, this Chinese's acting skills and government are already so terrifying. Li Min'er prefers the latter. Pan Wenji slowly turned back, and two women, Li Ruier and Jin Ying'ai, also surrounded him. The three of them formed a corner and surrounded Subai. Subai still stood there, motionless, not moving at all. "You said, all my bugs are dead," Pan Wenji looked at Li Min'er and asked. Then, Pan Wenji tentatively stretched out his hand and hooked it gently, apparently to summon those bugs. After a while, worms emerged from the skin on Subai's right shoulder. The number was increasing. At the same time, Subai's breath was decreasing. It was a kind of reduction in vital activity. "The bug is still there." Pan Wenji waved his hand, and the bugs got back into the skin of Subai's right arm. Even Li Minor was obviously stunned when she saw this scene. "Damn! Is it an illusion caused by the bugs in my body? Or was it because he was too weak that he had hallucinations and delusions when the bug entered his body?" Pan Wenji pondered for a moment. "Forget it, I'd better take the bug out of his body. Since you said he has a problem, it might really be unsafe. I can't allow an unsafe puppet to follow me all the time." Pan Wenji walked up to Subai, placed one hand on Subai's Tianling cap, and took out a red box with the other hand. The box released a special fragrance, which should be irresistible to those bugs. Attractive flavor. However, even at this moment, Subai still stood there motionless, as if he had really accepted his own ending. Pan Wenji looked into Subai's eyes and sensed Subai's breath fluctuations. Finally, with a pop sound, he closed the box, turned around, and said angrily, "I told you, once my puppet is refined, it will never escape my control. You two Korean women are really what's more, I have been an agent for too long and I have to doubt everything I see. Are you tired?" Since after repeated tests, Subai confirmed that there was no problem, Pan Wenji would not be able to say that he would destroy Subai, and he would not be stupid enough to do such a thing as cutting off his own arm. When he entered the story world this time, he only had 3 precious insect eggs with him, and 2 of them were used on Subai. How could he give up just because he just wanted to? His investment has not been recouped yet. "Keep walking and get out of here." Pan Wenji continued to take the lead. Jin Ying'ai withdrew the metal barb, Li Ruier also put away the silk thread, and the 2 women walked on both sides of Pan Wenji. Subai continued to carry Li Min'er and continued to move forward. Li Min'er finally calmed down a lot along the way. When they arrived at a checkpoint on the highway, it was already dark. Pan Wenji began to wonder about the formation and planned to spend the night here. Because he is far away from that county, he no longer has to worry about the 100 Ghosts night parade disturbing his rest at night, but he still needs to make arrangements, because Pan Wenji knows that he cannot be the only one who is ready to listen to the audience now. Heading to the location of the nuclear power plant. Subai put Li Min'er down, and Li Min'er's aura was much thicker than before. It was obvious that the vitality of those insects had restored her to at least 40 to 50% of her strength, and she was indeed able to protect herself to a certain extent. "You go on sentry duty." Pan Wenji directed Subaideo. Without saying a word, Subai went directly to the roof of the bay and crouched there. This checkpoint was set up between the county town and the nuclear power plant. It used to be guarded by special personnel to prevent outsiders and vehicles from entering. However, 30 years later, it has long been abandoned. "Miss Min'er, you are worrying too much." Pan Wenji was not in a hurry to rest, but walked to Li Min'er. "Isn't it to test more to make sure everything is safe?" Li Min'er shook her head. "It should be that while your bugs gave me life, they also brought side effects to my spirit, otherwise I wouldn't have that illusion. You are actually a half-step puppet now. It is normal for your consciousness to be blurred and confused." Pan Wenji explained. "When I found the Chinese man, his condition was much worse than yours. He was almost only he is still half-breathed, and there is no way he can rebel." Li Min'er nodded and lay down with her clothes on. Pan Wenji found a wall and leaned against it and began to rest. Li Ruier and Jin Ying'ai also began to rest. In the radiation zone, the body's rejection reaction is indispensable. It means that everyone here is constantly losing blood loss condition, so you really need to take rest and conditioning your body very seriously. 3 hours passed quickly in the thick darkness of night. Lee Minor seemed to have spent too much time in bed and slept lightly. She opened her eyes and looked at Subai crouching on the roof. For some reason, Lee Minor had the illusion that the Chinese man who could only see a blurry shadow was actually looking at her with a kind of greed. What is he greedy for? Perhaps, the verification during the day seemed to indicate that there was really something wrong with his consciousness. Lee Minor no longer thinks that Subai is acting, because she feels that no one can act the scene so realistically, and it seems to have gone beyond the scope of acting. Because there are thick dark clouds in the sky, the stars and moon cannot be seen here at night, making it look very dark. Lee Minor slowly released her silk threads. These threads continued to stretch at first, silently, and the position of the threads was directly aimed at Pan Wenji. At the same time, the same thing happened to my sister Li Ruier. The thread began to be slowly released, and the target was also Pan Wenji. The two sisters almost broke up because of the elder sister's health, but now that the elder sister has regained her abilities, they naturally stand together again very familiarly. Getting rid of Pan Wenji can cut off Pan Wenji's control over those bugs. When Pan Wenji can't control his sister Lee Minor and can't control the Chinese audience, it will be equivalent to letting Lee Minor regain her freedom. As for Jin Yingge, once Pan Wenji dies, Jin Yingge will not be able to make waves by herself. She will probably not dare to take direct action with the two sisters after Pan Wenji's death and choose to leave. The complex yet simple relationship between the audience is displayed, in all its glory under this dark curtain. And Pan Wenji seemed to have really slept a little deeply. He personally released and controlled 3 insect eggs today, which was also a huge drain on him. Moreover, he did not realize that it had only been half a day. When the time comes, these 2 North Korean sisters are actually ready to kill themselves and betray them. This team has just been established. From the perspective of pursuing interests, everyone gathering together now is a manifestation of maximizing interests and minimizing risks. Pan Wenji he was wary of the 2 sisters betraying each other, but he didn't expect it. These 2 sisters were so extreme that they couldn't bear it all night. As if Lee Minor suddenly realized something, she slowly retracted the thread, leaving only Li Ruier's thread slowly extending towards Pan Wenji. Because Lee Minor suddenly remembered that when she really takes action against Pan Wenji, she will inevitably release murderous intent, and this will definitely be sensed by the bugs in her body and pass to Pan Wenji in an instant, which is equivalent to reminding Pan Wenji. Because of this, Lee Minor wisely took back the silk thread. But when Lee Minor's eyes subconsciously looked at the roof of the building, only to find the figure that had been crouching there motionless disappeared. I went on a long trip today and was very tired. I didn't sleep all night last night. I went to the hotel in the afternoon and slept for 3 hours before getting up and typing. Only then did I realize that the previous chapter had been blocked. I asked the editor and the problem was not big. I just needed to modify it. It's just to avoid someone's name, but the editor has already gone off work. The previous chapter, chapter 255, the rabbit dies and the fox sadness can only be unblocked until the editor goes to work tomorrow. Most readers should have read that chapter. If you haven't, you can search the Kongbu66 WeChat official account, and Long will post it in the official account later. I'll finish writing the next chapter at about 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm a little tired, and my state is really not good enough. For example, this chapter is broken, and Long feels it's not up to standard. I originally wanted to write 2 chapters and post them together, but after thinking about it, I decided to post them first. Come out so everyone doesn't have to wait. Don't panic, hold on tight to the dragon. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 530. Li Rui's silk thread was already very close to Pan Wenji. When the distance was less than 3 meters, the front end of the silk thread suddenly lifted up, like a poisonous snake preparing to attack. However, at this moment, one foot stepped directly on the thread. Buzz. The threads began to twist as if they were active, trying to get rid of their restraints, and even set off waves of air. Pan Wenji was woken up immediately, and his little body jumped up. Jin Yingei quickly opened her eyes, and the metal bone spurs on her arms suddenly aroused. They are all veterans, and they are not simple people. They may have been a little slack in the past as is human nature, but when they are really in danger, they can quickly show the qualities that a veteran should have. Just like what happened at the train station last time, when those terrible sarcomas appeared, nearly 100 senior people on the platform did not just scatter and run away, but directly gathered together to resist. Otherwise, once they all ran away, they would be killed by the sarcomas. For their part in the massacre, Subai's feet were very steady. When Pan Wenji saw this scene, he immediately understood what was happening, and immediately yelled, "You two treacherous women, you damn northern barbarians!" Sister Li Rui's eyes widened, and for a moment, several more silk threads were released from her body and stabbed directly at Subai. The texture of these threads was extremely hard, and they also had a clear connection with the user. They should be the natal weapons. One type. Subai stretched out his hands, without any fancy, directly grabbed the silk threads one by one with his hands, and directly wrapped these silk threads around his palms and arms. The threads were sharp and carried a terrifying aura, strangling Subai's palms and arms until they were bloody, but Subai's arms and hands were recovering rapidly. But Subai acted as if nothing was wrong, suddenly opened his arms and pulled hard. A terrible pulling force landed on her sister Li Rui in a straight-to-the-point way. Li Rui's whole body was dragged towards Subai like a kite caught on the string. Break. But Li Rui was still very decisive and cut the thread directly. For a moment, her face showed a pale look, and blood overflowed from the corner of her mouth. In fact, her thread was really terrifying. It killed people invisible and was impossible to guard against. It was no better than other gods. There was no difference between weapons and weapons, but this Chinese puppet just faced her head on. Just straight up. Just don't beat around the bush. Just rely on pure physical strength. Crush you. Ravage you. And I beat you until you lose your temper. Li Rui glanced at her sister, her heart skipped a beat, and she immediately retreated and ran away. Jin Yingei didn't chase her either. Li Rui was injured, but she was not incapable of defeating her. There was no benefit in chasing her now. At the same time, there was another person here. Sister Li Minor stood there motionless, because she could feel the bugs in her body, and had already received the order from Pan Wenji after Pan Wenji woke up. If she dared to act rashly, these bugs would leave her body, and then she would return to the half-dead state she was lying on the bed before. Pan Wenji was steadily eating Li Minor to death. Now that Li Rui was severely injured by his puppet and escaped, the crisis in the night was finally resolved. Damn northern barbarian, I'm going to turn you into a puppet like him. I'm going to make you want to betray me. I'm going to make you want to kill me. I'm going to betray you. When Pan Wenji cursed angrily, Subai was walking towards Li Minor step by step. Pan Wenji was stunned and immediately walked up to Subai. Baby, you can't kill this one. One of my insect eggs is in her body. It would be a big loss if you kill me. Let me refine her, refine her. While talking, Pan Wenji wanted to reach out and touch Subai's chest. Pan Wenji really liked this puppet who had just executed his orders perfectly and protected him from assassination. However, Pan Wenji's hand that stretched out to touch Sudbai's chest stopped in mid-air. Because he was horrified to find that Sudbai's face, which had always been dull, actually showed a smile at the corner of his mouth. Yes. Smile. He's actually laughing. Pan Wenji immediately trembled with fright. The puppet did not have self-awareness, and Pan Wenji did not want to make something similar to the ancient family simulation robot in science fiction movies. So, when your puppet smiles. Pan Wenji knew it was bad. Because Jin Yingge was standing behind Sudbai, she couldn't see Pan Wenji's reaction, so she didn't know what happened. Sudbai stretched out his hand and gently placed it on Pan Wenji's head. Touched it? After rubbing it? Pan Wenji was short, so he looked like an adult trying to comfort his little brother. Swallowing subconsciously, Pan Wenji felt his body trembling. At the moment, Jin Yingge is far away from her, separated by the Chinese, and the Chinese's hand is on top of her head. She is famous for her weak melee ability, otherwise the two northern barbarian women would not dare to attack her. By assassinating yourself, you won't have to find partners and helpers every time you enter the story world. And this Chinese man's close combat power is absolutely terrifying. When the other party smiled, Pan Wenji had actually tried to stop the circulation of insects in his body. However, Pan Wenji was surprised to find that for the Chinese and the puppet in front of him, no impact at all. Suddenly, Pan Wenji suddenly thought of what Li Min'er said during the day. The bugs in her body felt the sadness of a rabbit dying and a fox, but she clearly saw those bugs crawling out again. How can this be? You saved my life, and I saved yours. We owe nothing to each other. When Sudbai spoke, he showed the white teeth in his lips, which was enough to show that Sudbai had used the relationship with Pan Wenji in the past 2 days to refine all the vitality of those insects into his own vitality. The body has long stopped decaying. As for her, Sudbai pointed at Li Min'er, I want it. This. Pan Wenji wanted to ask, don't we both owe each other, why do we still need Li Min'er? You know, I can't take back the bugs inside you, but the bugs she kicked inside can still be taken back. But Pan Wenji still didn't dare to ask, because one is a knife and one is a fish, and even if they don't owe each other, isn't it also part of the audience's code of life to trap and rob each other? Sudbai patted Pan Wenji's head again, then walked up to Li Min'er, lowered his head, and revealed 2 sinister fangs in his mouth, which penetrated directly into Li Min'er's neck. The bugs in Li Min'er's body were being eaten crazily into her body by Sudbai. How did he do it? He could actually eat the ironworms I personally cultivated as nourishment? Jin Yingge seemed to hesitate whether to take action, but after thinking about it, she still didn't move, because Pan Wenji didn't move either. He just stood there and watched the Chinese eat his bug. Finally, Li Min'er's vitality completely disappeared at this time, turning into a mummy and falling to the ground. Sudbai stretched out his hand and gently wiped away the blood on the corner of his mouth. A look of satisfaction appeared on his face, and then he disappeared into the darkness in front of him. Pan Wenji was so relieved that he fell down and sat down, his expression blank. Jin Yong'e wanted to come over and say, look, I said before that this puppet is very ominous. But thinking about it, it seems that it is not convenient for me to continue to stimulate Pan Wenji, who is already a little distracted. Sudbai was walking alone in the forest. The trees, flowers, and grass had long since withered. At night, these big dead trees created a desolate atmosphere. Leaning against a tree, Sudbai looked up at the sky. There were no stars in the dense clouds, like a huge black hand covering the sky in front of him. Before, Sudbai didn't know why he was treated differently by the broadcaster and pulled out for punishment, but now, Sudbai seemed to understand. He reached out and gently touched the small patch on his right arm that seemed to be similar to other. The skin has a different touch in different places. Here, it seems a little smoother. Some bugs crawled out of this piece of skin, but Subai smiled slightly and waved his hand, and the bugs disappeared immediately. This was the afterimage cloned by Subai. Everything swallowed by this piece of skin seemed to be incapacitated. Transform it into an image. Subai didn't know why he had the ability to master this piece of skin. It felt completely unexplainable, but it really existed. Could it be that this piece of skin planned to follow me out of the station secretly, but was discovered by the radio and punished directly? But why did it leave when I was sleeping at home and follow me into the story world wholeheartedly? It doesn't make sense. If it does not enter the story world, in the real world, it would be difficult for broadcasters to deal with it so freely. It seems that the radiation of these 30 years is not broadcasting to target itself, but broadcasting to directly use radiation to target this piece of skin. After erasing the remaining consciousness and some abilities on this piece of skin, Subai was just lying on his back inexplicably. Just like that, Subai raised his head, motionless, looking at the sky in a daze. In the corner of his eye, Subai saw a guy wearing a bright yellow robe appearing more than 10 meters away from him, and he actually continued to get closer to him. Is this Japanese Onmyoji having a seizure? Onmyoji's enhancements are very similar to Fatty's Taoist enhancements in many ways. For example, his melee ability is very weak. If he deliberately kept a distance from Subai and used magic to deal with Subai, Subai would be really troublesome, but he is so stupid. He walked towards himself step by step in a daze. This Onmyoji. Is your brain flooded? Subai was still leaning against the tree, motionless. But the Japanese Onmyoji kept taking the initiative to get closer to Subai with an expression of excitement and uncontrollable excitement. Finally, Onmyoji stood in front of Subai. His face was smeared with a thick layer of rouge, so thick that it looked like he was wearing a mask. He had a slender figure and a rather feminine air, a bit like the type of Gongzi, but this kind of monster from the East, it is not comparable to the simple showmanship of Gongzi. After all, the Japanese seem to have a unique ability to deal with the dark side of the human heart. Any gloomy and dark things, the Japanese can do it to the ultimate level openly. However, when the distance got closer, Subai suddenly discovered that the other person's body seemed to be shrouded in a faint layer of mist. His figure and appearance were not so easy for people to remember clearly, and a wisp of the fragrant scent of cherry blossoms could not be remembered clearly. With his arrival, it lingered on the tip of Subai's nose. Subai could now kill this idiot with one punch, but Subai still didn't take action. When you think you can easily kill an idiot with one punch, you tend to hesitate. You will wonder if there is something fishy in this world. Is there such a stupid veteran? Or is there some conspiracy inside that I haven't realized yet? The Onmyoji's body was trembling, and Subai could sense his emotional instability. However, the next scene made Subai stunned. Ha ha ha, that Korean dwarf lost control of this puppet. He actually lost it? This baby is mine, thank you Amaterasu for your blessing. Thank you Amaterasu for your blessing. Japanese. After talking, the Japanese Onmyoji was so excited that he couldn't help himself and immediately hugged Subai. He kissed Subai directly on the face. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 531. I'm afraid that time will suddenly become quiet. This sentence fits the current environment, the current atmosphere, and what is happening now. Subai himself did not expect that the scene would appear. Just now, I was foolishly wondering if this Japanese Onmyoji had any conspiracy, but in the end, I was. For a moment, Subai subconsciously began to raise his energy. He felt that at this time, blowing up the guy in front of him seemed to be the most important thing he should do now. Before, I often laughed at the fat man who had been anally hummed by that black corpse, but now, I was actually forcibly kissed by a Japanese Onmyoji. Subai could now feel the thick and greasy layer of rouge on his cheeks. It's disgusting. Huh, The Onmyoji seemed to sense the sudden change of chi in Sudbai's body. He didn't know that Sudbai was trying to blow his head off, but he said excitedly, "It must be that Korean dwarf puppet. There's a problem, don't worry, my dear, I have something better for you than his bugs. Believe me, that Korean dwarf can only let you play less than half of your strength, but I can make you play more than 80% of your strength. You may be the key to whether I can survive, but, no, you are the key to whether I can have a good harvest in this story world." Sudbai couldn't understand what the Japanese Onmyoji was mumbling in Japanese. However, when he saw the Onmyoji taking out a jade bottle, Sudbai subconsciously dismissed his own words. Strength. These Japanese and Korean listeners don't know whether it's because they happen to meet extreme scientific elements, or whether it's because the Japanese and Korean audience circles already have this kind of scientific bias. In short, it seems that listeners on the Korean peninsula and Japanese listeners have taken a more intensive route than Chinese listeners. Yes, richer. You must know that Fatty's formation level is already the most accomplished among the domestic senior listeners that Sudbai has ever seen, but that Korean dwarf Pan Wenji was able to crack Fatty's formation in a short time, and in no time he could move forward and retreat freely while destroying the formation to attract Fatty's attention. Comparing Fatty's formation level with Pan Wenji's formation level, it is clear at a glance which one is higher. There is also this Onmyoji. It seems that his methods are not necessarily weaker than Pan Wenji. Except for the woman Jin Yingge, the rest Sudbai has come into contact with, such as the Lee sisters, such as that warrior, such as that ninjas, they actually focus more on their development in other aspects. For example, the escape techniques of samurai, the movement techniques of ninjas, and the silk threads of the Lee sisters all carry a special aura that is enhanced by itself, or can be called artistic aura. For example, if he is a samurai enhancer, then he is a samurai. The katana sword, armor, and even the fighting method are all suitable for this enhancement, and it can even be said to be suitable for this profession. This is a feeling that Sudbai has never felt before. It is like the difference between the cultures of two audience circles. In the Chinese circle, the most typical one is Sudbai. You can say that he is a vampire who has been strengthened. He basically does not understand vampire magic. You can say that he is a zombie enhancement, but he only relies on the physical fitness and explosive power of the zombie. As for the rest of the zombie's abilities and methods, Sudbai has little development value, so he is too lazy to bother with them. Just like the fat man, if you say he is a Taoist priest for reinforcement, he has done a lot of miscellaneous research for you. The same is true for the monk and gyatso. They are not loyal to a kind of reinforcement, but pursue an absolute egoism, and this kind of egoism can represent an extremely high pursuit of power. I just want to be stronger, I just want to be stronger. This is a common value in Chinese circles, and everyone is running on this path. The Japanese and Korean audiences have an additional understanding and depth of self-strengthening. These two are not determined by any nationality or ethnicity. The biggest reason may be that the competitiveness of the audience between the two circles is different. In comparison, it is obvious that the competition among listeners in the Chinese circle is more intense, while the Japanese and Korean circles appear to be relatively soft. Otherwise, the radio would not forcefully rely on rewards to build up the rapport between Japanese and Korean listeners. The relationship is antagonistic, which proves that their respective domestic competitions cannot satisfy the broadcasters. I spent a lot of effort, exchanged a lot of weighty and medicinal materials, and personally collected heavenly materials and earthly treasures from the story world and secret realms. I refined this soul-locking pill, which can forcibly enhance a person's soul. Realm. There is another sentence that the Onmyoji did not say, that is, the side effect of this soul-locking pill is simply a bug. It can indeed help a senior listener greatly improve the soul level with extremely high efficiency, but the side effect is serious soul damage. Instability, in layman's terms, means the possibility of becoming a confused fool. But for the Onmyoji at this time, he really only needs a fool. Using the effect of the soul-locking pill, he can directly use the most domineering method to restrain the remaining restrictions left by the Korean dwarf in the body of the Chinese audience. Completely erase it, and at the same time create conditions for yourself to rearrange your own restrictions on this Chinese audience. Subai couldn't understand what he was talking about, but Subai could clearly feel how overbearing the energy fluctuations hidden in the pill he took out of the jade bottle were. Hey, do you want to feed yourself again? Subai's only regret before was that Pan Wenji only had 3 insect eggs. Whether it was Pan Wenji's previous insect eggs or this pill, there must be corresponding magic to activate it in order to be effective, so Subai stood there and continued to remain motionless. Of course, the premise is that this damn Onmyoji will not forcefully kiss him again. Otherwise, according to Subai's temper, regardless of your pros and cons, I will beat you up first. The Onmyoji danced with excitement. His hands squeezed Subai's shoulders and chest, and Subai's mouth couldn't help but twitch. I will endure. It seems that the Korean dwarf has spent a lot of money on your body's recovery. His insect eggs are not much cheaper than my soul-locking pill. A meaningful smile appeared on the corner of the Onmyoji's mouth, took a deep breath, and spoke with a smile to please. He took out a puppet from his arms, and then he immediately pasted the talisman paper on Subai's forehead and various places on his body. The last talisman was pasted on Subai's forehead. Oops. This doll is softer than the Western anthropomorphic dolls that Subai saw in the train station a while ago, and it is more oriental in aesthetics. However, it is a bit hard to say whether it really suits the taste of Chinese people. I am a female character with a face full of blush and red lips. Japanese people may like it, but Chinese people really can't appreciate it. The Onmyoji bit his finger and a drop of blood fell onto the doll's face. In an instant, Subai felt a mental force coming from his body trying to control his nerve center. If Subai was unconscious at this time, it would be possible to succeed, but at this time Subai was awake and his condition had recovered. At the end of the day, these attempts to control one's own mental power seem a bit childish. Subai calmly suppressed these mental powers. The Onmyoji took 2 heavy breaths and looked very tired, but he still brought the soul-locking pill to Subai's mouth with a touch of expectation. He held the pill in one hand and the puppet in the other. Voice. Be good, open your mouth. Although it was said in Japanese, the meaning was conveyed to Subai through the connection between the doll and Subai using mental power, so Subai could understand it. Only. What surprised the Onmyoji was that Subai didn't open his mouth. Be good, open your mouth, Onmyoji kept saying. Subai still didn't open his mouth, but there was a teasing look on his face. Obazan. Immediately, Subai spit out these 3 words. Young Master Su doesn't know much Japanese, but this word is a relatively popular and common Japanese vocabulary in China. Moreover, if it is used at this time, even if it does not require too many Japanese expressions and richness, it can still be used. It's enough. When Subai said Obazan /, the Onmyoji instantly put away his previous emotions of excitement, anticipation, and happiness, and a look of depth, seriousness, and deep confusion appeared on his face. You dare to eat the eggs Pan Wenji gave you, why don't you dare to eat the elixir I gave you? This time. What the Onmyoji spoke was no longer Japanese, but standard Chinese Mandarin with straight words and no accent at all. At the same time, his voice is no longer feminine and masculine. Instead, it completely turned into a woman's voice. Subai shrugged and reached out to wipe the spot on his cheek where he had just been kissed. It seemed that it was not so hard to accept the kiss from a woman. Well, at least that's how Subai felt. You hide it well and you disguise it well. But when you walked over, the curvature and position of your crotch and the root of your thigh, this detail betrayed you. I know a fat man, he is an experienced driver, and he talked to me about the curvature of the female crotch and the root of the thigh. To prove whether this woman has a rich sex life, this theory is not 100% accurate, nor is it completely scientific, but when you first come over, it is a little too obvious. If you're a woman and you kiss me in a state of extreme excitement because you found a puppet, that's not normal. Subai paused and smiled slightly. Are you trying to deceive me, just like taking advantage of Pan Wenji, stupidly pretending that you are still a puppet, and then put the pill you gave me into your mouth? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 532. As he spoke, the situation suddenly changed. The Onmyoji immediately retreated, and at the same time, he instantly deployed 13 defensive barriers in front of him. Subai's eyes flashed with a hint of ridicule, and he ran in front of me. Still want to run? If you had stayed far away from the beginning, I really couldn't do anything to you, but if you are so close, don't run away. In an instant, lines of blood formed on the palm of Subai's right hand. At the same time, the 5 nails immediately grew longer, but the nail caps were bright red. After experiencing 30 years of radiation, Subai's body and bloodline were basically twisted into a ball. But when he recovered by chance, Subai himself was a little surprised to find that many of his bloodlines were actually destroyed because of this. After forcibly merging together, now, I really don't have to switch from state to state anymore. Maybe this is, if you survive a catastrophe, you will be blessed later. Snapped. Of the 13 lines of defense laid out by the Onmyoji, 10 of them were destroyed by Subai in an instant, and the remaining 3 were on the verge of collapse. At this time, the Onmyoji had not put much distance between itself and Subai. At this pace, there is no way he can run away. However, the Onmyoji clasped his hands together, and then turned them upside down. The soul-locking pill that had fallen to the ground suddenly exploded at this time. A short purple thunder shot out of the pill, directly turning it into something within a few meters of radius. The scorched earth. This also directly blocked Subai's pace, forcing Subai to stop for a moment, while the Onmyoji took advantage of this gap to further widen the distance. The power of this elixir cannot harm Subai, but you must know that this elixir was originally intended for Subai to take, and the effect of purple thunder is actually the same as that of a hellfire shotgun. It has an obvious effect of destroying evil spirits. This thing exploded in Subai's body. Subai's bloodline and zombie bloodline both belong to the dark category. It was like pouring a bowl of water into a pot of hot oil and it would definitely explode. Does the other party want to kill him? This made it difficult for Subai to understand why this Japanese Onmyoji must kill him. What benefits can he gain from his side? The Onmyoji stopped 15 meters away from Subai, and sighed with some disappointment. All these calculations were actually seen through by the Chinese because of the way she walked. This was really a surprise to her. A very frustrating thing. When the Onmyoji gained a safe distance, samurai and female ninja slowly walked out in the direction of the deadwood forest on both sides of Subai. Want 3v1? Subai was not too panicked. It was not like he had never fought against them before. Even though the formation of the 3 of them worked very well together, definitely 1-1-1/U003E3, Subai's strength had basically recovered now. Even after the bloodline was forcibly fused, his strength improved. Even if the 3 of them join forces, Subai is really not afraid of them. But Subai also knew that these 3 Japanese people should also understand this. Since they knew that even if the 3 of them joined forces, they would not be able to keep themselves, when they stepped out at this time, did they want to walk on the catwalk to show off their situation? You know, we are not your opponent. You are very strong. Among the senior people, you are definitely among the best. I have always heard that the Chinese audience circle is highly competitive and has many listeners. There are excellent people in it. Will become even better. I didn't really believe it before, but now I do. The Onmyoji now speaks in a Chinese female voice, but the thick rouge on her face and the way she deliberately pretends to be a man have not changed. It seems that there is no need to change. We are not here for a blind date, nor are we here to say something like if we can't live together, we will forget each other. Therefore, even if Subai discovers that he is a woman, there is indeed no need to really put his woman's one side was specially shown to Subai. Thank you for your compliment. I think you Japanese audience are quite good. You are developing morally, intellectually, physically, artistically, and healthily, Subai said with a smile. At the same time, Subai was keenly aware that there were 3 more auras coming towards him. Approaching quickly here. Them. There are people. There is a breath that I am very familiar with. The Onmyoji naturally understood the sarcasm in Subai's words. She shook her head disdainfully. This is why many Tao originating from your China have been passed down in Japan, while in your China, there's no atmosphere left for it to continue. What Onmyoji said is indeed true. For example, many of the arts and national quintessence called Tao that the Japanese are very proud of now were actually transmitted from China in the early years, but in recent years, they have indeed been preserved by Japan and developed relatively well. The Chinese are still too eager for quick success, and this seems to be reflected in the audience circle. Subai did not continue to answer the sentence, but began to concentrate on alert, and his body began to prepare to retreat. Stop him. The Onmyoji swung his feather fan, and the spatial orientation around Subai became directly distorted and confused. This does not mean that the Onmyoji has the ability to control the laws of space. This can only be regarded as an advanced deception method, forcibly making you lose your sense of direction and a sense of space. The samurai held a dagger in each hand and rushed towards Subai. His samurai sword had been snatched away by Subai before, but that sword was not actually his natural weapon. In other words, this samurai actually has a way to squeeze the bottom of the box. The 2 daggers, one cutting horizontally and the other stabbing deeply, were both aimed at Subai's vital parts. Subai did not retreat but advanced, and continued to plan to be tough, with a demonstrative smile at the corner of his mouth. It seems that the last fight really left too many psychological shadows, so this time the samurai directly chose to retreat, and the ninja appeared directly to fill the gap created by the samurai's retreat to prevent Subai from escaping. However, when Subai scared off the warriors, his speed suddenly increased. The vampire's evil agility was perfectly displayed at this time, and he prepared to leave in the opposite direction. Obviously, these 3 Japanese did not dare to forcefully keep Subai at the expense of themselves. In this case, it would be extremely simple for Subai to break free from their encirclement. However, the big dead trees in front of Subai suddenly glowed with terrifying vitality, and vines shot out, almost overwhelming the sky and blocking the ground in front of Subai. Sophia. Subai was very familiar with this hand, and he had also sensed a familiar aura before. Looking at this method of controlling plants, Subai naturally guessed who was coming. When Subai was about to tear apart the vine suddenly spread apart. Behind the vine, a man wearing a white breastplate appeared. The man had blonde hair, an aquiline nose, an unruly and gloomy expression, and falcon-like eyes. Staring at Subai, a layer of fire was vaguely burning on his body. This is the fighting spirit of the West is strengthening. On the other side, a sharp roar came out, and a stocky guy as big as a bear crashed down, and the surrounding ground trembled a few times due to his arrival. This is a black man, very tall, with terrifying muscles all over his body. At this time, he stood up straight and looked at Subai with a slight look down on him. Then, a woman in a blue dress came slowly. The woman was holding a green wand. She looked so noble and inviolable. If it wasn't Sophia, who could it be? Su, we meet again, Sophia greeted Subai. Yes, we meet again. Have you left China? Subai asked. I left. The injury was quite serious, so I returned home after that incident, Sophia replied with a smile. Oh, then, what does this mean? Subai shrugged, and the situation in front of him was instantly reversed. The three Japanese before were useless and could not help him, but with the addition of these three Westerners, it was completely different, and a deep sense of crisis arose in Subai's heart. First of all, I am very lucky to be able to see you again in this story world. This should be the second story world we have experienced together. The last time, you were just an experiencer. But now, I have to rely on the advantage of numbers to face you. Sophia seemed very candid, but she immediately changed the topic and became extremely sharp. The Japanese and Koreans were not involved in the incident at the train station, so they did not know some things. But you can guess, Sue, what did I think of when I learned that you could actually eat and absorb the ironworms raised by the Korean? On that platform, when 100 of us senior listeners were surrounded by those things and struggling to support themselves, you were standing outside leisurely, hugging one of them, calmly. I will never forget this image. Obviously, Sophia guessed that Subai must have brought something out from the train station, otherwise there would be no way to explain Subai's recovery and domineering way of devouring it. This is a smart woman, but also a dangerous woman. So, what are you going to do? Subai looked at the Japanese and then at the Westerners. There are many of us, Sophia spoke concisely, so, we plan to kill you first, and then find the secrets of that kind of creature from you. I'm sorry, I will not make any transactions with you, and I am not willing to leave you alive. Or something like making a puppet. Because, Sue, you are really outstanding and mysterious. I believe that as long as I give you a little gap and a chance, you can make a comeback. This is a direct declaration of death. 6 people, 6 seniors, the one with enhanced fighting spirit and the black man were obviously stronger. Subai might not be at a disadvantage even in a one-on-one fight. Subai's current situation couldn't be more dangerous. However, after listening to Sophia's words, Subai asked seriously, did you know that there is a record that has been held first by the Chinese for many, many years? Although there is a trend of being overtaken by ASEAN, at least now speak. Never interact with Chinese people. More than anyone else. Subai picked up a branch from the ground casually, and then threw it into the air in a fancy way. The branch moved very fast and made a sound of breaking through the air. Then, Subai seemed to be motivated, and threw it into the air. Or maybe you feel you need to clear away the bad luck you've had these days, so you want to appear deliberately frivolous. Shouted. A cloud-piercing arrow, thousands of troops come to meet you. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 533. The scene fell into silence for a while. Because everyone present seemed to realize what was going to happen. Even the proud Sophia slowly smoothed the arrogant curve of her mouth at this time. The vindictive man's vindictiveness further solidified, not against Subai, but against those who might appear and launch a sneak attack on him and others. The bear-like black man's eyes were wandering around, not daring to be careless at all. Onmyoji holds a fan in one hand and stares around. Samurai and ninjas also increased their vigilance at this time. The tranquility at this time is more like a foreshadowing of the coming storm. However, the preparation time seems to be a bit too long. The branch that Subai threw up into the sky had already fallen down. 2 minutes passed. The cloud-piercing arrow was sent out, but the thousands of troops and horses were not seen yet. Subai pursed his lips subconsciously, right? Those 3 guys didn't follow? This shouldn't be the case. After a short period of tranquility, there was a kind of anger, and this anger obviously did not come from Subai, but from everyone present except Subai. They found that they had been frightened by a wisecrack and a real tree branch for more than 2 minutes. This scene was too embarrassing. Sophia looked at Subai, showed a smile, and said, "If you are the 3 Chinese companions waiting for you, I can advise you not to wait. In fact, their actions have been monitored by us." They had chosen another route to avoid the remaining waves of listeners and had already headed deeper into the nuclear power plant. Sophia said slowly, as if this could erase the embarrassment she had just prepared for. The Grudge Man and the Black Bear subconsciously pressed towards Subai, as did the samurai and ninjas. Only the Onmyoji and Sophia did not get close because of their own strengthening. However, the space, flowers, plants and trees around Subai were all affected by this at this time. The existence of these 2 people is full of malice towards Subai. However, Subai, who was still a little unsure, breathed a sigh of relief after hearing Sophia's words. He didn't even look at the 4 people who were pressing towards him. In fact, the reason why these 4 people pressed towards him so slowly was just to maximize the power of the team. Because the 2 sides had never practiced together, at this time, we need to pull each other's energy and run into the rhythm at the same time. This is to prevent Subai from killing Subai when he jumps over the wall and finds someone to use as a backing to die with him. This is very likely to happen because Subai has the strength. Even if they were not killed by Subai, if they were severely injured by him, it would not be a situation these people were willing to endure. After all, broadcast has not released the main quest until now. The real race has not yet begun, and no one wants to be lame before the starting gun is fired. I was not sure at first, but now that you told me that they went to the nuclear power plant through another route, it helped me confirm one thing, and that is. Subai turned his head and shouted to everyone around him, it won't be fun if we don't come out again. Yes, Subai was sure that the fat man, Gyatso, and the monk must be nearby at this time. For no other reason, what kind of characters are they 3? How could he still be secretly monitored by you, Sophia, and then move on stupidly? If it were the fat man or Gyatso and the monk who were alone, this would still be possible, but they were 3 people together, could they continue to move forward regardless of being watched? Even if you, Sophia, can control nearby plants to serve as your eyes and ears, you should not underestimate the abilities of those 3 people. Those are 3 old foxes through and through. Dong dong, dong dong dong, dong dong dong, dong dong dong. A rhythmic sound suddenly sounded. At the 6 o'clock direction of everyone, a fat man suddenly appeared there. It seemed that he had been there for a long time, but no one noticed it. The fat man was making rhythm with his mouth while making fists with his hands and spreading his feet, doing the axe gang dance. The scene looked very funny and ridiculous. But no one is laughing. Because the appearance of this fat man itself illustrates a very serious problem, that is, the monitoring of these 3 Chinese people has completely failed. The fat man danced very seriously and devotedly, as if he had entered the wrong theater, and his style made him feel a little uncomfortable. The people who were pressing towards Subai subconsciously stopped their rhythm at this moment and started looking around again. Obviously, a helper has appeared. More obviously, there should be more than one helper. Amitabha. A chant of the Buddha came from the direction of 12 o'clock. Under a big dead tree, there was a monk sitting. The monk was wearing cassocks, leggings, and plain cloth shoes. His whole person exuded a solemn look. Breath. The monk opened his eyes slightly, and out of the corner of his eye, he looked at the fat man who was seriously dancing the axe gang dance there. The corners of his mouth twitched subconsciously, but he still refused the option of dancing like the fat man. After all, monks still have to face themselves. With the appearance of the fat man and the monk, Sophia's expression became serious. The current situation is already 3v6. Although Sophia doesn't know much about Fatty and Monk, these 2 people have never really appeared on the train station platform. She has some impression of Fatty Sophia, but Fatty left after the train entered the station. When they got to the platform, the wind had turned strong in advance, so Sophia didn't see Fatty's ability to fight. But as long as you are not a fool, we can all see some clues. The first is that these two people have been hiding nearby for a long time. They should have used some kind of formation. If the Korean dwarf was here, he should be able to discover the formation, but the Korean dwarf was not drawn into the group, so he actually let others in. I watched the show right under my nose for a long time. Secondly, one was dancing an unknown type of weird dance, and the other was chanting sutras with his hands clasped or cross-legged. While immersed in the matter at hand, he also expressed a kind of affection for the 6 people present. Ignore. I should dance my dance, he should recite his prayers. As for whoever you love, go ahead. But it wasn't over yet. From the other direction, a low roar of a wolf came. Gyatso didn't appear directly, he walked over. Because of the battle method, Gyatso was similar to Subai and was not good at it, so the hidden location is a bit far away, but now, I just walked over. Gyatso did not dance like the fat man, nor did he chant sutras like the monks. He just scanned everyone present with his cold eyes. Just like he often stood on the slopes of the plateau, scanning the wolves that might appear at any time. Of course, wolves are very scary existences in the eyes of ordinary people, but Gyatso was far from becoming a human being when he was very young. When he was listening to the audience, he regarded the wolf as his hunting target. At this moment, what Gyatso was looking at was his prey. All 3 people showed up, and it was obvious that they did not disappoint Subai. Even Sophia could discover him. Subai really didn't believe that these 3 people hadn't discovered him in the past few days. Otherwise, he would have despised his own IQ. No, to be precise, he despised the IQ of these 3 people. Before, Subai was weak and almost on the verge of death. Subai himself knew that at that time, it was obviously unrealistic to expect Fatty and the others to be so attentive to him and take care of and protect him. No matter how close a friendship is, it is not reliable in the audience circle, especially in the context of the story world. At that time, it was Subai who took the initiative to leave him alone. You should do whatever you want. But it's different now. Subai's strength has recovered to some extent, and he is no longer a burden. He is qualified to negotiate terms and favors. Fatty and Subai don't owe anything, but the monk and Gyatso, Subai when 8,000 dead souls were led to Shanghai, the monk and Gyatso personally accepted the favor they owed to Subai. It's time to pay off the debt. It's time to take action. After finishing the dance, Fatty stroked his hair and smiled silly, shouting to Subai, I was just thinking about how to dance the Axe Gang, but I couldn't keep up with your rhythm. I'm sorry, Dabai. Then, the fat man looked at the monk and Gyatso again, and said with some dissatisfaction, you two are bald donkeys, can't you put down your arrogance and dance with me? Cooperate with Dabai, who has just recovered from a serious illness, and let him satisfy his secondary fantasy. The monk and Gyatso seemed speechless when they heard this. Sophia sighed, stared at Subai, and said with some disappointment, it seems that I really can't kill you this time, but I hope you can protect yourself in this story world. Sophia's words obviously meant not to fight. She was afraid that both sides would suffer and someone else would get the short end of the stick in the end, or that when the main mission was released, she and others would no longer have the ability to fight for anything. This is a very wise decision. At that moment, the fighting man and the black man put away their energy, the samurai and the ninja also put away their weapons, and everyone was ready to leave. The Onmyoji glanced at Subai angrily and cursed in Japanese. Subai didn't understand what it meant, but it was definitely not a good word. Obviously, they were very sorry that they could not kill Subai at this time. A murderous situation that was about to start seemed to be dissipated into nothing at this moment. Subai took his time and looked at the fat man, then at the monk, and then at Gyatso. To be honest, what Subai decided to do was secondary. What mattered most was what these three people thought. Soon, the three gave Subai their thoughts. The fat man began to make secrets with his hands, and the formations rose up directly. At the same time, the Taoist calamity clouds were already gathering above his head. The monk stood up slowly, his cassock fluttering, and a string of Buddhist beads appeared in his hand. Behind him, the sound of Buddha's voice was loud for a while. Gyatso held a hatchet in his hand, the wolf totem appeared on his chest, and his sharp breath burst out directly. Sophia was stunned. She glanced around in disbelief. Them intend till death. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 534. In fact, although Subai, Fatty, Monk and Gyatso all live under the same roof, Subai is actually very different from the other three people. The fat man is good at pretending to be a pig and eating the tiger. He will act like a grandson for you with a smile on his face, and then turn around and step on you when there is a chance and benefit, and trample all your descendants. The monk is good at calculating, he is very courageous, and he is very thoughtful. Whether in the story world or in the real world, the monk can find a suitable point of his own, but the monk's acting style is a bit like cooking fresh food, like start with the little things and like to have everything under control. As for Gyatso, because of his status, he actually had a kind of indifference towards many things, so he appeared to be relatively single-minded in his judgment of some things. Of course, single-mindedness here is not a derogatory term, but a kind of crispness and neatness. If there is benefit, go up, if there is no benefit, leave. Only Subai, even when he is not sick, often has a strong personal romanticism in his behavior. When he is sick, there is no need to say much. It is a bit like I just enjoy it to the fullest, who cares, after I die, the flood will surge into the sky. According to Subai's original opinion, the three monks should make the same choice as Sophia. Since there is no absolute advantage in hunting prey, let's try to avoid a lose-lose situation. After all, the main mission of the broadcast has not been released yet. This when the time comes, of course you can eat meat if you can. If you can't eat it, then try to save yourself as much as possible. However, what surprised Subai was that, whether it was the fat man, the monk, or Gyatso, all three of them chose another way, a way that was more extreme and seemed to go against the principle of putting interests first. Is it true that those who are close to vermilion are red and those who are close to ink are black? You stayed with a mentally ill person for a long time and got infected? Actually, it's really not the case. The monk and Gyatso may have really been sleeping for 3 months. Even the eminent monk was holding his breath and wanted to vent, but this was definitely not the main reason. The main reason was actually because we are strong. You are weak. When we want to eat meat, you are meat. Very simple law of the jungle, very straightforward truth. Just imagine, to kill Subai alone, all 6 of you have to go out and arrange the arrangements with great fanfare. So, now we are 4 people. The roles of hunter and prey naturally need to be reversed. After all, although the fat man, the monk, and Gyatso each have their own merits in the choice of enhancement, if taken into consideration, the 4 of them are actually pretty much the same. Otherwise, if there is a huge disparity here, the 4 of them will not be the same. Of course, there may be a little bit of intention to compensate Subai. After all, the fundamental reason for Subai's involvement in danger was that the 3 of them had some intention of giving up on Subai. Now that Subai has recovered, naturally you have to submit a certificate of nomination. When the time comes, the 4 of you will still be a team and continue to live under the same roof and have fun. From the first time the 4 of us got to know each other, the way everyone got along was so pure and simple. 6 flying swords appeared behind the fat man. His natal flying sword did not move, but floated in front of his chest as the formation I. For a moment, the 6 flying swords shot out quickly and turned into many rays. After images are flying down, and the lethality is much less in this way, but what the fat man wants to do is actually to control the accusation from the big scene, to harass and restrict the place to the greatest extent, and to fight in person, know the work he is responsible for. The 4 of them have been together for a long time, so there is nothing to say about their cooperation. However, in Sudbai's impression, there are really not many opportunities for the 4 of them to fight together against an opponent team of almost the same level, let alone often I still face some secret realms and visions. Gyatso is holding a hatchet. The left side of his face exudes a faint golden light, and his appearance is solemn. The right side of his face has a twisted and angry expression. He is a demon, a Buddha, and a demon. When he came down and met him for the first time, he simply said, "Knife away the samurai who was actively defending in front of him." This warrior thought that he would suffer a physical loss with Sudbai, so he was a little afraid, but with the person in front of him, he still had a chance, but his dreams were full, but the reality was very skinny. When the opponent's hatchet fell, he felt what I felt was full of fear. If Sudbai relied purely on strength and body to crush him, this Japanese samurai would feel as if he didn't know any martial arts at all. It was like an 8-year-old boy who had practiced martial arts for many years and still couldn't beat him. It's the same thing for otakus in their 20s. But Gyatso gave this Japanese samurai a different feeling. He could feel that Gyatso was deeply immersed in martial arts and swordsmanship to a terrifying degree. After forcing the Japanese samurai back with one strike, Gyatso continued to rush in. His job was actually to do it on the ground and on the ground. As for the finishing and real killing, someone else would do it. It was the first time for the 4 of them to engage in a team battle in such a formal way, and their cooperation showed a kind of comfort that made them feel a little surprised. Sophia raised her magic wand high. Since the other party decided to lose both sides, she naturally would not let others take advantage of her. "Fight, if you want to fight, fight." Onmyoji also raised the fan in his hand, preparing to cooperate with Sophia. "I am the Buddha with mercy." The monk sitting under the dead tree clasped his hands together, and a Buddha shadow appeared, floated into the sky, and sat down directly facing Sophia and the Onmyoji. For a moment, Sophia's ability to sense the power of nature and the Onmyoji's sense of the situation were directly confused by the monk. Sophia recited a spell, and plants with poisonous thorns suddenly grew around the monk, stabbing directly at the monk. The Onmyoji also waved his fan. From an external perspective, the monk's position began to distort. There was also refraction in the line of sight. However, the monk remained motionless. Under him, a phantom of a lotus appeared, preventing the surrounding vegetation from getting close to him. At the same time, Sanskrit sounds sounded. Although the formation around him was ups and downs, the monk was like a boat sitting steadily in the huge waves. "No matter how you wind from east to west, north, or south, I will remain unmoved." But in this way, the monk directly used his own strength to fight against the 2 people on the opposite side, and they were 2 strengtheners who were proficient in side attacks. This was enough to create a better fighting environment for the rest of his team. The fat man understood immediately and withdrew the flying swords that were harassing Sophia and the Onmyoji. At the same time, he began to arrange a new formation. The influence of the thunder tribulation was also concentrated on the others. Now that the monks have succeeded in pairing, what they have to do next is to kill the rest of the other party as much as possible. Sudbai was naturally unwilling to be left alone at this time. He kicked the ground with one leg and crashed directly into the fighting spirit enhancer. The other party seemed to have been waiting for Sudbai. When he saw Sudbai coming over on his own initiative, his fighting spirit burst out. A long sword appeared in his hand. Fighting energy gathered in the sword and struck at Sudbai. The ground around him was also frightened by this. It sunk under the pressure. But Sudbai just liked this way of fighting head-on. At that moment, the toughness of the zombie bloodline and the increased power of the bloodline were directly integrated together, and he held two Hellfire shotguns in his hands. Boom! Sudbai's gun butt held the opponent's long sword, and for a moment, the released energy caused concussive sounds in the surroundings. After the Hellfire shotgun became Sudbai's natal weapon, it was no longer a simple weapon with 1,000 story points, but a weapon that followed Sudbai and became stronger and evolved as Sudbai became stronger. Therefore, in this collision, the Hellfire shotgun did not fall behind at all. However, the surge and reverberation of this power was definitely not comfortable for the two parties involved. Sudbai retreated and his arms went numb, while the fighting spirit enhancer's blood boiled and his face became very pale. "It's ugly." The black man immediately came over to help, but a thunderstorm aura from the sky was directly aimed at him. He immediately stopped and prepared to deal with the threat from the sky, but the fat man showed a mocking smile on his lips, and aimed the thunderstorm aura at the man. The ninja was also frightened and alert, and did not dare to join the battle group. Then the fat man continued to move. Anyway, he could still hold on for 10 minutes before the thunder tribulation dissipated. He would scare you here, scare you again there, and try his best to maximize the effect of this thunder tribulation for Sudbai and him. Gyatso provides an environment where opponents can be quickly eliminated one-on-one. The second round of confrontation between Sudbai and the Dochi Enhancer began directly. Both sides aimed to defeat the opponent quickly, because whoever could defeat the opponent first and then get out to deal with the others would be able to dominate the process of the team battle. And when Sudbai found that the other person had the same mentality as him, he felt really happy. Who is better at fighting each other than me? This time, Sudbai blocked the opponent's long sword with one gun, and pointed the other gun directly at the opponent's chest. However, the opponent condensed a halo of fighting energy on his chest in a moment, and then the aperture was directed towards Sud. Exploded in vain. Sudbai's eyes narrowed, and instead of withdrawing the Hellfire shotgun he had stretched out to defend, he forcefully took the opponent's blow. However, when Sudbai was blown away, the Hellfire shotgun also after pulling the trigger, the opponent actually received a heavy shot in the chest and was shot away. Boom! Boom! The two fell to the ground together, and then got up together instantly. Immediately afterwards, the Dochi Enhancer, whose chest armor was completely damaged, started a new round of sprint towards Sudbai like a tiger descending from the mountain. Sudbai's chest was also covered in blood, but when he saw the other party rushing toward him again, he screamed in joy. Immediately, Sudbai reached out and took out a mask from his body. "Wear it on your face. This is a skull mask." The moment he puts on this mask, Sudbai's whole temperament immediately becomes cold. Through the eye holes of the mask, you can see Sudbai's eyes, which are completely changed at this time. It became crimson. The stimulating effect of the mask and the fighting spirit that was already surging in Sudbai's heart were combined. Sudbai almost looked like a fighting madman and flew towards the oncoming fighting spirit enhancer. But seeing his opponent suddenly become like this fighting spirit enhancer's originally strong fighting spirit suddenly became loose. Because of the opponent's expression, the opponent's movements, and the opponent's momentum, it seems that his opponent is no longer a human with precise thinking, but has become a person who ignores death, ignores pain, ignores any cost, and just wants to tear apart the person in front of him. All ferocious beasts. Die, die, die. Sudbai was like the most devout believer, praying for death. Long recently discovered a book. The style is very similar to horror broadcast. It is also a dark text. The quality is very good, but the author seems a bit young. At the end, Long always felt that he did not grasp it very well, and there is still some gap between him and Long. But Long admired his fragments, and the plot design was also very eye-catching. The book already has 3 million words, which is considered to be a large volume. Long has read it all and thinks it is very good, so I recommend it to everyone. That book is called Horror Internet Articles. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 535. To be honest, this kind of tit-for-tat team battle with a truly huge disparity in strength rarely happened. Subai remembered that the last time he had a serious team battle was in the cat-faced old lady's story world. But that time it was because the broadcast created a team model, which was a broadcast-style stimulating product that forcibly linked personal interests with the team's interests. It was a unique model that was endorsed by broadcasters, but even so, at the beginning, there was no real wave of team battles. Strong people teamed up with strong people, and weak people teamed up with weak people. To keep warm, the number of battles is actually not many. In most cases, one party retreats in spite of the difficulties. Moreover, in that team battle, some people in Subai's team and the opponent's team turned against each other. In the end, the team battle actually became nondescript. But this time, it was different, at least it felt completely different. First of all, in terms of strength, the opposing team, a joint team composed of Japanese and Westerners, is not weak enough to be beaten by Subai and others, although Subai and others clearly have the upper hand in strength. But this kind of fighting is very unstable. If you are not careful, your own personnel may be injured or even lost. Although the probability of the weak defeating the strong is small, it has not never happened. Secondly, at least for now, Subai knows that he can leave his back to the monk and the fat man. They are all smart people. Smart people at least know when to have what thoughts, and now they can focus on giving each other to each other. The most correct choice is to destroy them all or most of them. Facing Subai's posture, which was almost like a beast descending a mountain, the fighting spirit intensifier began to look a little timid, especially when Subai told you clearly. Come. In exchange for injuries. Come. Right? This made the Dochi enhancer very depressed, because the information he had received from Sophia before was that Subai was a vampire enhancer. The strength of the vampire enhancer was still very strong, and the level should not be low. Therefore, at the beginning, this fighting spirit enhancer fought against Subai with the mentality of facing a powerful vampire. His fighting spirit and his equipment would not be inferior when facing the vampire. After all, there are many more vampire enhancers in the Western audience circle than in the Eastern circle. He has fought with vampire listeners many times, so he naturally feels that he is experienced enough. A vampire from the East, haha, probably just with a high bloodline level. But after the real fight, Subai's performance and strength made the fighting spirit intensifier feel frightened from the beginning. When did the vampires fight like this? When did the vampires adopt a purely head-on fighting style? Aren't they supposed to be lurking in the dark, more elegant than assassins, cold-blooded than magicians, with speed and agility? Why is this Eastern vampire in front of me? Simply more barbarian than Western barbarian enhancers? Subai didn't know what this Dochi enhancer was thinking. Subai didn't often wear this mask before, and even wore it only a few times, because after wearing it, Subai was really crazy and not the kind of person he was. The kind of madness you feel when you are sick. When you are sick, your emotions go to extremes, but your thinking is still very clear. But after putting on this mask, you fall into hysterical madness. In the past, due to various complicated situations, Subai did not dare to put on the mask rashly. Otherwise, even if he gained stronger power and that kind of terrifying madness, he might end up losing his cool and falling into someone else's trap. But I don't know. But this time, no problem. There is a fat man coordinating the overall situation, there is Gyatso cooperating on the other side, and there is a monk doing the finale. Subai knew clearly. At this time, I can finally indulge myself. I have really been looking forward to it for a long time. Sutton, you go help Moraz, and I will help you offset the lightning disaster in the sky. Mihoko, help me. Sophia knew that in this situation, her team must not give the other party a chance to separate and defeat each other. The ninjas and samurai over there were already having a hard time dealing with the Tibetan monk, while Sutton, the strong black man, was beaten overhead. Leiji had no time to care, and he and the Onmyoji Mihoko were even more held back by the monk. If this continues, as long as either Tsubai or Fan Seng kills or severely injures an opponent first, he will be able to take part in other battles, thus completely breaking the balance. The final situation will probably be massacre. Sophia will never allow this situation to occur, even though she knows that these four Chinese are very powerful, and it is actually very difficult for her to defeat and kill them, but Sophia knows that the reason why the other party dares to vow to start this in the second team battle, the fundamental reason was actually that the opponent was determined to be strong enough to kill his side. But as long as her side can show the ability to rebound and stalemate, Sophia won't believe it. These Chinese are so ruthless that they would rather kill one or two people to kill themselves and others. The magic wand in Sophia's hand released an even more dazzling light at this time, and even her eyes seemed to turn into amber at this time. At this moment, even the people around Sophia discovered that Sophia's eyes were actually magic gems. This woman dug out her original eyes and replaced them with magic gems. Everyone has their own unique side, especially seniors. Sophia entered the ranks of seniors much earlier than Tsubai. Although she has never been able to make a big breakthrough, even being promoted to a senior audience is still useless for Sophia now. I have no clue, but for such a long time, this British woman didn't really just sit in a cafe all day drinking coffee and chatting with others about the weather. In fact, this woman did a lot of things in order to enrich herself and improve her strength and abilities. Sophia's whole body immediately floated up. She seemed to be as noble and elegant as the goddess of nature at this moment. When she looked into the sky, the calamity cloud condensed by the fat man actually began to dissipate. Among them, the power of thunder and lightning suddenly became much thinner. This surprised the fat man, and secretly sighed that this woman was really not simple. However, Fatty is not a vegetarian. At this time, the most important thing is to find a breakthrough early to cause casualties to the opponent. At the moment, Gyatso has a clear upper hand in the duel between the ninja and the samurai even in 1v2. But the two Japanese also knew their own sense of proportion and knew that they couldn't beat him hard on, so they specialized in delaying tactics and forcibly dragged Gyatso there. They also made their own contribution to the entire team battle. As for Tsubai, it was obvious that the fighting spirit enhancer was not an easy character to deal with, but also a tough guy. Even if the black man was restrained by him, it would take a certain amount of time for Tsubai to deal with the fighting spirit enhancer. But now, the British woman suddenly revealed her trump card, and the entire team battle situation was gradually pushed from the advantageous side of the fat man to the balanced side. Monk, you bright guy, let this British woman see the big cock of our Chinese man. A large number of chess pieces appeared in the fat man's hand. After scattering the chess pieces beside him, the fat man sat cross-legged with his natal flying sword hovering above his head. Immediately, the fat man took out a piece of talisman paper and recited a spell. The talisman paper burned into ashes. The fat man opened his mouth and swallowed all the ashes of the talisman paper. The Lord of Heaven has come to conquer the demons. The fat man shouted low, and in an instant, his whole temperament suddenly changed, as if he was possessed by a heavenly king. At the same time, the fat man uttered obscure syllables in his mouth, pointing his finger to the sky. Thunder comes. For a moment, the calamity cloud that had just been forcibly dispersed by Sophia solidified again, and purple thunder snakes shuttled through the clouds. The wind moves. The fat man pointed at Sophia again, and Sophia immediately felt an invisible pressure from somewhere. Her whole body trembled, and a wisp of blood overflowed from the corner of her mouth. Onmyoji Mihoko immediately opened her paper fan, and the shadow of a big snake appeared on the back of the paper fan. Mihoko bit the tip of her tongue and sprayed a mouthful of blood on the paper fan. In an instant, the shadow of a big snake was entrenched, guarding herself, and Mihoko was able to withstand the pressure from the fat man. When the monk saw this, he knew that the fat man was planning to pay a certain price to solve the situation in front of him. At this time, he really couldn't delay. Especially when Fatty was concentrating on dealing with Sophia and Mihoko, he had temporarily given up suppressing the black man Sutton. At the moment, Sutton had gone to Subai. Obviously, the team's strategy has changed. From waiting for Subai and Gyatso to kill one of the other players first, it has become a breakthrough for Fatty and Monk to compete with Sophia and Mihoko. The Buddhist beads in the monk's hand immediately broke and flew, and a golden Buddhist bead hovered directly in front of the monk's chest. This is a relic. Then, next to the monk, a different-looking eminent monk appeared. He was chanting sutras and worshipping the Buddha. All his Buddha's light was blessing the monk. For a time, the monk's aura also increased sharply. "Hey," the monk shouted low, and the Buddha's light pressed down. At this moment, the phantom of the big snake showed vague signs of collapse. Boom! Subai grabbed a claw on the chest of Moraz, the fighting spirit enhancer. Moraz's armor had collapsed. Subai's chest was scratched so hard that his flesh and blood rolled. Subai's whole body was also covered with injuries. But it is constantly recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, Moraz found with some despair that Subai's aura seemed to be getting higher and higher as the battle continued. This was a complete lunatic. Fortunately, Sutton's strong body squeezed in at this time, blocking Subai's continuous attack on Moraz. After a fist fight with Sutton, there were several crisp sounds of bones breaking on Subai's body, which forced Subai to stop temporarily and quickly adjust his condition by breathing heavily. Sutton waved his hand, and blood was already flowing from his palm. How could this vampire be so powerful? Subai gasped and smiled heartily. This one. It's really a fun game. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 536. Sutton did not show a state similar to that of an orc in front of Subai, but his physical strength was really not weaker than Subai. You must know that when Subai fought against him, he combined zombie blood and blood. The power of the line has been fully assembled, and just like that, it is just a match with Sutton. Of course, if it was a one-on-one duel, Subai was confident that he could kill this strong black man, because Subai had an advantage over Sutton in that Subai not only had absolute physical strength, he also had the blood of the blood race. With speed and other means, Sutton can be exhausted to death by his own agility. It is very difficult to tread two boats, especially when it comes to the choice of audience reinforcement. Those who choose the multi-reinforcement route are likely to end up with several lines being mediocre and die in the fierce competition. However, if you step out, the results will be completely different. Especially when facing opponents of the same level, you can have a clear advantage. Others have one card, but you have two cards, which you can swap out at leisure. However, even Subai felt an invisible pressure when facing Sutton and Moraz teaming up. Sutton and Moraes knew each other, so there was no need to talk about their cooperation. After the war started again, Sutton was responsible for the front, and Moraes was responsible for the support and countermeasures. Both of them maximized their respective advantages. So, even if Subai, who was wearing a mask and was already going crazy, had no advantage when facing the two of them joining forces, he even felt like he was being beaten. But Subai still felt satisfied with this hearty feeling. Only when facing such an opponent, only when facing such a stalemate, could he put aside the pressure deep in his heart and all the previous moves that were lingering in his mind. and methods are applied. However, what was more shocking in his heart was not Subai. On the contrary, Subai was not only feeling happy now, but also feeling happy, even though the speed of injuries on his body had far exceeded the speed that the bloodline could heal itself. Even though the fighting spirit was still high, the power exerted continued to weaken as time went by, but Subai still only had a very good feeling in his mind. Nothing but fun. However, Sutton and Moraes were different. They felt that the man in front of them was really a terrifying monster. He did not hesitate to be injured, and even seemed to be willing to die. He did not worry about what his teammates would do. I won't betray him at this time, and I don't care that at this time, he has become the most dangerous person in this team battle. Damn it, are these Chinese really made up of brothers? No. Even if they are brothers, it's impossible to be intimate after becoming an audience member. In fact, they don't understand the philosophy of getting along with Subai and Fatty. Can Fatty be trusted? Obviously not. This guy had seriously persuaded Subai not to understand cause and effect, but he actually realized it very well. The monk and Gyatso were actually the same, they were both people who couldn't be trusted. But in this specific situation, Subai knew what they would do and what they could do. Therefore, Subai would put on the mask with confidence, even if his position was indeed the most dangerous at this time, because he had to entangle the other two masters alone. Fighting strength. But Subai still had no scruples. Morris and Sutton saw that it was obviously impossible to deal with Subai in a short time, so they also wanted one of them to leave the battle group and help the two who were becoming more and more in front of Fan Seng. The exhausted Japanese might launch a sneak attack on the fat man or the monk to relieve the increasingly unbearable pressure on Sophia and Mihoko. However, every time one of them was about to withdraw from the battle group, the Eastern vampire would go crazy and try to pull that person back even if he suffered heavy losses. This kind of fierceness simply made Sutton and Moraes tremble in their hearts. They know that it is impossible for their side to win because there is a person in the other team who has lost his mind and is 100% contributing to the team. A team with such a person is invincible. Because Moraes and Sutton knew that neither they nor the Japanese could achieve this step and sacrifice themselves without limit for the victory of the team. This is actually the team's weakness. For a while, broadcasting began to try the squad mode in almost every story world, but then it became silent. Obviously, broadcasting was exploring and analyzing the squad mode. Maybe broadcasting had to come to a conclusion in the end, that is, these audiences are familiar with the rules and environment where self-interest comes first and they are struggling. If you ask them to form a team, it is actually no different from not forming a team. In fact, even if the broadcast does not set up a team mode or does not set up a team crystal certification, in the ordinary story world, when the listeners feel that it is suitable or should form a team, they will spontaneously get together to form a small group. But this small group will be full of internal fighting, calculations, betrayal, and vendetta. Obviously, the team mode of broadcasting has not actually changed this in essence. Even if broadcasting forcibly sets the team to not fight each other, if you dig a hole for teammates to jump or simply watch from the other side and watch until death, listeners, the experience of these methods and dealing with broadcasting rules is really slippery. Just like radio has always thought that it can control the audience at the palm of its hand, the audience has actually played a game called terror radio to a certain extent. Perhaps, it is precisely because of this that broadcasters are gradually no longer so enthusiastic about the squad mode, because if there is no squad mode, the listeners still have to play how they want to perfectly play the squad team battle. The rest of the factors such as wisdom, calculation, courage, etc. are basically impossible to achieve. Everyone has their own little calculation, unless the broadcast sets up a winner team that can resurrect all dead team members and reward them together, but this really reduces the storytelling that broadcasting pursues. No matter what, At least at this time, Subai and the four of them embody the team model that the broadcaster has always wanted to see, but this has preconditions, and this precondition cannot be copied. Subai's body was already dripping with blood, and the injuries on his body were unimaginably serious, but the result he got in return was to kill Sutton and Moraz, the two people with the strongest melee abilities in the opposing team. Stake to your own side. And balance. It was finally broken. After all. Strong or weak? Set it out here. At this moment, Gyatso's hatchet finally penetrated the warrior's chest. The warrior was shocked to find out at the moment he was stabbed to death that the opponent had completely figured out his body skills through fighting him, and wait patiently and find this instant killing opportunity. It can be said that his death was not unjust. The other party's martial arts attainments were much higher than his. Without the check and balance of the samurai, the female ninja was naturally helpless. Then, she chose a decision that most of the audience would make. That is, escape. Yes, she knew that the balance had been broken, and there was a one-sided massacre below, and her escape directly accelerated the collapse. If a person does not protect himself, he will be punished by heaven and earth. In fact, the reason why the monk, the fat man, and Gyatso chose to fight this battle was because the situation was what they had expected. In fact, the gap between the two sides is not only at the level of strength. But whether it is Subai or Fatty, or Monk or Gyatso, they all know in their hearts that the real advantage of our side is that everyone on our side is smart enough, and will not be short-sighted and know what to do. To sacrifice oneself to obtain benefits. Of course, the sacrifice here does not refer to death, but refers to something similar to a fat man and a monk who lead the Lord of Heaven to possess him and the other who caused the remnant soul of the eminent monk to appear in the relic. This is actually a debilitating thing. But they all did it without hesitation. And Subai? Well, this guy is the least of their worries. The samurai died and the female ninja escaped. Gyatso did not chase, but rushed directly to Sophia and Mihoko. When Gyatso's hatchet came over, the fat man and the monk instantly exerted their strength again. In an instant, the Orokai phantom completely collapsed, blood overflowed from Sophia's eyes, and she fell down like a kite with a broken string. Mihoko's body trembled, and her face was extremely pale, even covering the thick rouge on her face. Gyatso's knife struck just right, and the simple hatchet smoothly cut off Sophia's moving head. The headless body fell to the ground, with a kind of miserable beauty. Mihoko suffered strong blows from the fat man and the monk at the same time. Her soul collapsed at this time, and her body began to burn. Then, the fat man, the monk, and Gyatso all turned their attention to Subai. Sutton and Moraes looked at each other. The team battle had failed and the water was overflowing. There was no way to save it. So both of them were ready to escape at this time. They escaped separately. One of them could always get out. But when Sutton was about to run, a long sword pierced his chest. Then, Moraes pulled out the long sword, inspired his fighting spirit, and fled away. Sutton staggered, and when faced with the encirclement of Subai, Fatty, Monk and Gyatso, he roared like a brown bear unwillingly. The result of the team battle was that 4 enemies were killed and 2 were injured. None of me is dead. Subai, who was standing there crumbling, picked up the headless body of Sophia. With a touch of pity and emotion, he touched Sophia's arm expressively, and then without hesitation, he stabbed his fangs into the body that had not yet cooled down. At this time, it was already sunset time. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 537. Come on, Bimax, let's do it while it's hot. The fat man picked up on Myoji Mihoko's body and threw it towards Subai. Mihoko's soul was killed by the fat man and the monk, so her body was still intact, unlike Sophia whose head was cut off directly with a hatchet by Gyatso, which always made people feel a little unsightly. Although the British woman's pony figure is very attractive, but a headless pony, it is estimated that normal men will not be able to get hard. Sudbai's side of Sophia's body had shriveled up. He wiped his mouth and it was obvious that he was still unfinished. The blood of fresh and powerful people was constantly pouring in, and Sudbai's injuries were also constantly recovering. Blood was constantly flowing at the wound location, followed closely by new and tender granulations growing out. Except for injuries to the soul or injuries with huge residual damage attributes, Sudbai can recover from all other injuries on his own, provided there is enough blood to replenish them. In fact, Sudbai could stand next to the corpse and rely on his natural ability to directly extract the essence from the corpse and integrate it into his own body. However, that feeling seemed elegant, but Sudbai didn't like it. It's a bit like sitting coquettishly in a high-end restaurant and savoring the expensive dishes. And this kind of directly piercing the fangs into the corpse to suck the opponent's blood is like sitting in a food stall wearing flip-flops and eating and drinking. For Sudbai now, this is a way of sucking and recovering. And even more of a pleasure of enjoying the spoils as a victor. Mihoko's body was also caught in Sudbai's hands and started to suck it. The monk put the relic into his Buddhist beads again, stood up, and walked to Sudbai's side. The fat man also packed up his things and squatted there, smoking a cigarette and watching Sudbai eat with relish. Gyatso held a piece of cloth he found somewhere in his hand and was carefully wiping his hatchet. Sudbai, on the other hand, was enjoying his meal as if no one else was watching, and soon, there were only 4 cold mummies left on the ground. Feel good. Sudbai let out a sigh, like a person stretching after a full meal. The fat man threw the cigarette butt on the ground and immediately spat, "Damn, I suddenly feel so hungry when I see you eating." From time to time, Sudbai heard the sound of bones rubbing together. The external injuries were no longer visible, but some internal fractures or broken bones were also recovering intensively. The blood of the 4 seniors was really filling for Sudbai, especially after a fight and drinking the blood of the enemy to restore himself. The joy in it is really difficult to describe in words. "Then what are we going to do now?" The fat man scratched the ground with a small wooden stick in his hand. "Are we going to the nuclear power plant?" Sudbai was closing his eyes at this time, probably adjusting his breath, and was not participating in the discussion at this time. Of course, it was also because Sudbai had basically been following Pan Wenji and his gang of Koreans these days, so he was not interested in this. Not much is known about the story world. The monk pondered for a while and said, "The number of listeners who entered the story world this time exceeded our imagination. Although we intercepted and killed a group this time, there are still more listeners scattered around. From what the poor monk can see, we are still. It's better to be conservative first, recover from the injuries first, and then digest these people's equipment." The monk's suggestion was obviously more conservative. After all, after the team battle, the brothers were all injured. Of course, Sudbai was an exception, but the others needed time to lick their wounds. In addition, the main mission of the broadcast has not been released, and it always gives people a feeling of uncertainty. At this time, there is no obvious benefit goal, so there is no need to be too high profile. It is not impossible to keep a low profile appropriately. The corpses of the 4 people naturally became Sudbai's meal, and their magical weapons were collected. "Dabai, which one do you like?" Fatty shouted to Sudbai. Sudbai finally opened his eyes again at this time, and a ray of light was released from Sudbai's pupils. His aura suddenly rose, and then slowly became restrained. The strength has indeed improved, but to what extent, and what far-reaching impact the bloodline fusion due to 30 years of radiation will have, Sudbai doesn't know. He can only rely on what he will have in the future. "Time will give me time to explore slowly. I don't need it anymore, you can split it up." It's not that Sudbai is generous, but because Fatty and the others were able to take action this time, which was somewhat beyond Sudbai's expectations. As for the spoils, Subai was naturally willing to give up his part to show his attitude. Everyone, this is the truth. In addition, the most important thing is actually the last time at the train station. Subai actually collected a lot of things from the dead seniors, but kept them all in Lao Fang's house. And this time when the story world begins, and did not give Subai any time to prepare, so Subai naturally failed to bring those things into the story world. But no matter what, Subai did have enough inventory of magic weapons used by ordinary seniors, and he was indeed a little disdainful of them. Okay, anyway, you still have a lot of good things in your bedroom, so we won't be polite to you. Fatty obviously discovered the magic weapons that Subai brought back, and he also knew that Subai's family was indeed very wealthy now. After everyone divided their things, they went back on the road. Instead of taking the main road, they marched in the mountains and forests. Fatty and the monk alternately used formations to hide the whereabouts of themselves and others. Before, Sophia thought she was monitoring the whereabouts of Fatty and others. In fact, she only but the fat man and the others took advantage of them. Finally, the nuclear power plant finally appeared in front of everyone. After going down this hillside, we basically reached the entrance of the nuclear power plant. There are many scrapped vehicles in the nuclear power plant. 30 years have passed, and the place that was the source of evil now seems to be the same as usual, just more desolate. Someone is inside, the fat man pointed down. Sure enough, in the nuclear power plant, there were several figures moving at this time. Subai and the others happened to be standing at a high position, so they could see clearly at this time. Then let's just wait a little longer, the monk said. Now that someone has already entered, just wait for them to trigger the main mission of the broadcast. Even if there are any opportunities ahead, everyone will continue to act according to the predetermined policy. For the time being, there is no need to take risks when there is no benefit. Everyone sat down and began to rest. Gyatso's face looked a little solemn at this time. Now that he had arrived at the nuclear power plant, Gyatso asked, "In what specific aspects will the crisis set by this broadcast be manifested?" This is the proper meaning of the question. As a listener, you naturally know that the radio is preparing to play with you, but you must face it seriously and actively, and try your best to guess in advance the way the radio will play with you. For example, dripping wax, a small leather whip, or other more serious methods such as handcuffs, chains, eggplants, and cucumbers. In short, it's impossible to drop another nuclear bomb. We are not a big nuclear nation like Japan, the fat man joked. The monk squinted his eyes at this time, feeling at ease. "Monk, if you find something, tell me quickly," the fat man urged. "Do you still remember the night parade of hundreds of ghosts in the county?" the monk said. The poor monk has always been curious about where their corpses went. 30 years is indeed a long time, but even if the corpses are all rotten, then being eaten by some birds and animals will always leave traces, so it can't be that thorough. "I found a female corpse in the house where you put me before. It was beaten into pus by Fatty's magic circle," Subai said, "but the female corpse was murdered, not because of nuclear radiation, and died. Since people are dead, the souls of the dead usually stay not far from the place where they were. Most people who die accidentally carry resentments, so the probability of having souls is even greater," the fat man pondered. "On the way from the county town to the nuclear power plant, they are all too clean. I don't think the local South Korean government specially organized people to come over to clean up after the nuclear leak, and transported all the corpses of its own citizens out for proper burial." Referring to the attitude of the Japanese at the Fukushima nuclear power plant, they only dare to send robots to wander around the nuclear leakage area. Naturally, it is impossible for the Koreans here to say that they will send a large-scale army here to carry out cleaning. First, whether the troops themselves are willing, the second is that doing so actually makes no sense. The poor monk feels that their bodies were not disposed of artificially, but... At this point, the monk stood up, stretched out his hand and pointed to the nuclear power plant below, but should be in the nuclear power plant. How many corpses must be stored in the nuclear power plant? Wouldn't it become a ghost cave? Fatty muttered, it's a mass grave. Subai pursed his lips at this time and said, the current development of human beings is basically heading towards two extremes. One is infinity, which is the exploration and advancement of space, and the other is infinitesimal, which is towards finer particles. Go and research. In fact, humans do not have a high degree of understanding and research on nuclear and the terrible out-of-control effects of nuclear, and they are even in a state of partial knowledge. However, because the benefits that nuclear can bring are extremely huge, driven by interests, mankind temporarily put aside concerns about nuclear hazards and began to develop and utilize nuclear weapons. We have always believed that nuclear weapons have the greatest damage and impact on living things, but no one seems to have examined whether they also have special effects on dead people and the undead. At this time, Gyatso suddenly said with some surprise, why are those people always circling in one place?